Witch vs. Witch. 20XX, Heidelberg, Germany. The Witch of Anatomy vs. The Witch of Brick. Episode 11. The German night was cold and heavy. Above the black flow of the Neckar River, the silhouette of Heidelberg Castle rose like the bones of a colossal beast. The red sandstone walls, crumbled by the cannon fire of the 30 Years' War, glistened red beneath the moonlight like a dried clot of blood. Among the shadows of those crumbling walls, a woman moved without a sound. Her steps carried no weight. The arches of her feet rose to an abnormal height, minimizing the surface area that touched the ground. Ignoring gravity, she lightly stepped onto a broken railing and landed on the terrace. The Witch of Anatomy. She was a monster born in the underground anatomy lecture halls of Heidelberg University. She had opened and closed her own body hundreds of times, discarding every unnecessary organ, leaving behind only muscle and bone optimized purely for killing. The tips of her 10 fingers had been replaced, in place of fingerprints, with sharp bone scalpels. Sandstone dust fell silently every time she gripped a railing. Her gaze was fixed on the massive wine cellar located beneath the castle. There stood the largest wine barrel in the world, capable of holding 220,000 liters of wine. And right now, hidden inside that barrel, not wine, but a man submerged in a special red solution. A hemophiliac. A man cursed with the so-called royal disease, blood that would not clot. His blood was the permanent coolant that could cool a witch's overheated muscles and an unending power source. A rat crept in. A heavy voice rumbled through the terrace floor. The sound did not travel through the air. It traveled through the vibration of the ground beneath her feet. The Witch of Anatomy immediately dropped low. The bricks that made up the terrace floor where she stood began to bulge in a bizarre way. It wasn't a mere earthquake. The castle wall itself was alive and moving. Rumble, crash. An entire section of the red sandstone wall tore itself free and began taking the shape of a colossal human figure. Over 3 meters tall, her skin composed of brick and mortar, thick as armor. The Witch of Brick. She was part of this crumbling castle. She was the castle itself. Every time she took a single step, the entire castle screamed, "Get out of my castle. This isn't a slaughterhouse." The Witch of Brick raised a massive fist of stone. That fist looked as heavy as a battering ram, once used to break down castle gates in a siege. Not a slaughter. A surgery. "I've come to remove a tumor." The Witch of Anatomy replied low. She had already shifted her center of gravity forward, ready to run.
가보검. 100피 여기서부터 유료 분량이에요. 텍스트 6617자. 공백체에.
The Witch of Brick brought her fist down. The terrace floor caved in as if struck by a bomb, fragments scattering in every direction. But the Witch of Anatomy was no longer there. She had leapt before the dust even had time to rise. Her shoulder joint dislocated with a click, and as the bone shifted out of place, her arm's reach instantly extended more than 10 centimeters. Spinning in midair, she aimed for the Witch of Brick's neck. The bone scalpels at her fingertips gleamed with a chilling brilliance in the moonlight. KRRK. An unpleasant grinding sound rang out. The scalpel sliced exactly across her neck, but what it cut wasn't flesh. It was solid sandstone. Sparks flew and stone dust scattered, but the Witch of Brick didn't even flinch. "That tickles." The Witch of Brick scoffed and swung her arm. Even that simple swing generated wind pressure, like a typhoon. The Witch of Anatomy bent her waist at a bizarre angle to dodge the attack, made possible by having removed the cartilage between her vertebrae and replaced it with high-elasticity ligaments. Twisting like a mollusk, she wound her way around the stone fist and landed behind the Witch of Brick's back.
Hard.
Ordinary strikes won't get through. The Witch of Anatomy analyzed coldly. Her opponent was a walking fortress. Her entire outer hide was made of centuries-old castle stone. There was no winning a frontal assault. But every structure has a weakness. The gaps between the bricks. The mortar filling those gaps. Or the joints where movement was required. Let's see if there are any air holes. The Witch of Anatomy charged again, this time at even greater speed. Her calf muscles swelled, generating an explosive burst of acceleration. The Witch of Brick clasped both hands together and unleashed a downward, hammer blow, powerful enough to collapse the entire terrace.
Boom.
The floor caved in. The Witch of Anatomy leapt across the collapsing fragments of the floor like stepping stones. She ran along the top of the Witch of Brick's forearm. Her target, the inside of the armpit. The one exposed, uncovered spot revealed when the arm was raised. SHHK. It went in. The Witch of Anatomy's index finger scalpel drove into the gap in the Witch of Brick's left armpit. Not stone, but something like damp soil and moss-covered flesh. GRRGH. For the first time, the Witch of Brick let out a groan. She tried to grab the Witch of Anatomy from her forearm, but the Witch of Anatomy had already twisted the scalpel, severed the bundle of nerves, and slipped away. The Witch of Brick's left arm dropped uselessly. Her nerve had been severed, paralyzed. You little rat. A red glow burned in the Witch of Brick's eyes. With her still functioning right arm, she tore an entire broken statue from the surroundings and lifted it. A massive sculpture, easily weighing hundreds of kilograms. I'll flatten you. She hurled the statue like a javelin. On the narrow terrace, there was nowhere to dodge. Instead of dodging, the Witch of Anatomy deliberately broke her own collarbone, narrowing the width of her shoulders. Making her body as thin as a chopstick, she slipped through the blind spot in the statue's trajectory. The statue grazed her hair and shattered the tower behind her.
Crash.
Amid the roar of the collapsing tower, the two witches glared at each other. One, a giant with a paralyzed arm. The other, an assassin with a broken collarbone, her shoulder drooping. Let's head to the basement. That'll be your grave. The Witch of Anatomy smiled thinly. Tapping her broken collarbone back into place with her hand, she threw herself into the dark entrance leading to the underground wine cellar. The Witch of Brick pounded after her. The underground cellar was damp and cool. In the darkness, the massive oak barrel known as the Gross's Fass revealed its magnificent presence. 7 meters tall, 8 meters long. A size large enough to fit an entire house. A wine-tasting terrace had been built around the barrel, and the floor was made of old wooden planks. The Witch of Anatomy crouched atop the great barrel. Her eyes were fixed on its cork. He was in there. Soon after, the entrance shattered as the Witch of Brick burst in. The narrow basement was a disadvantage for her, but she forced the space wider by smashing through the walls. There you are. The Witch of Brick charged toward the barrel. She had no intention of protecting it. Whether the man inside was pulled out or killed didn't matter to her at all. With her still functioning right arm, she kicked at the barrel's support structure.
Crack.
The massive wooden support snapped, and the barrel, holding a capacity of 220,000 liters, tilted. The Witch of Anatomy lost her footing and slipped. Seizing the opening, the Witch of Brick threw a punch. The Witch of Anatomy twisted her body in midair, barely dodging, but the fist struck the side of the barrel with full force. Thud. Splash. The barrel burst open. Not centuries-old wine, but a red, viscous preservation fluid poured out like a collapsing dam. The basement floor instantly flooded red. Caught in the pressure of the liquid rising to her knees, the Witch of Anatomy was swept away and slammed into a wall. Something white drifted through the liquid. It was the man, wearing an oxygen mask, his face pale. He's mine. The Witch of Brick waded through the red liquid, reaching for the man. Her massive body gave her the advantage of pushing against the current, but the Witch of Anatomy didn't fight the current. She rode it. Kicking off the wall, she slid down across the surface of the liquid as if surfing. Her finger scalpels cut through the water.
Her target wasn't the man.
It was the Witch of Brick's ankle. SHK. Underwater, there was no sound, but the sensation at her fingertips was crystal clear. The Witch of Anatomy struck precisely into the gap in the brickwork at the Witch of Brick's Achilles tendon. She drove the blade in and forcibly wrenched the ankle joint open. Arg! The giant lost her balance and toppled into the red liquid. A massive wave surged. The Witch of Brick flailed, trying to rise, but one arm was paralyzed and one ankle severed. She was now nothing more than a crumbled castle wall. The Witch of Anatomy landed atop a floating fragment of the barrel. Sweeping back her wet hair, she looked down coldly. Demolition complete. She leapt down onto the chest of the fallen witch of brick, the thickest, hardest part of her breastplate. But the witch of anatomy knew, no matter how hard the stone, it always has a grain. She brought the 10 fingers of both hands together into a single, sharp point. Then, contracting every muscle in her body, she channeled all her force into the energy of the fall.
Crack.
A dull sound rang out. Her hand had punched through the brick of the witch of brick's chest. The sound of stone shattering and bone breaking rang out simultaneously. Without stopping, the witch of anatomy drove her hand deeper, seizing the true heart of the witch of brick, hidden beneath her stone shell. Guhck. The witch of brick coughed up blood. The red bricks that made up her body lost their strength and began crumbling away in droves. It was the moment the once mighty castle wall finally collapsed. Instead of crushing the heart, the witch of anatomy precisely severed the blood vessels, stopping only her breath. The basement fell silent once more. Only the sound of the rippling red liquid could be heard. The witch of anatomy pulled the floating man out of the liquid. He was still breathing. She buried her nose in the nape of his neck and breathed in his scent. A coppery, sweet smell of blood. Blood that would never clot. Her overheated muscles seemed to cool at the scent alone. Time to go home now. The surgery was a success. Carrying the man on her back, she made her way out of the ruined basement of Heidelberg Castle. Beneath the moonlight, the crumbling red castle glowed an even deeper red.